The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was bigger than any building Jake Morrison had ever seen on Earth. Tall white walls stretched up so high he could barely see the ceiling. Strange lights floated in the air without any wires or poles holding them up. The floor was made of some kind of smooth stone that seemed to glow with its own light. Jake stood at the center of the hall wearing his best dark blue uniform. The golden eagle pin on his chest felt heavy today. Around him sat the representatives of 47 different alien species. Some looked like giant birds with metal feathers. Others were blue and seemed to be made of living water. The Zephyrians looked like tall crystals that sparkled when they moved. They made soft ringing sounds when they talked. For 3 years, Jake had come to this place as Earth's main representative. For 3 years, he had tried to make these aliens understand that humans were not the monsters they thought they were. Today was different. Today he was here to say goodbye. The Zephyrian representative stood up. His crystal body caught the floating lights and threw rainbow colors across the walls. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The motion has been voted on and passed, the Zephyrian said. Humans will be limited to 12 star systems. No more human expansion will be allowed. This is for the safety of all civilized species in the galaxy. Jake felt his jaw tighten. 12 systems, Earth and 11 others. That was all these aliens thought humanity deserved out of the entire galaxy? They were afraid of humans, he knew that. Afraid because humans had gone from flying in wooden airplanes to traveling between stars in less than 200 years. Afraid because humans had built cities on dead worlds and made them green again. Afraid because humans never gave up when things got hard. The Neptari representative rose next. She was blue and moved like she was swimming through air instead of walking. Her voice gurgled when she spoke, like she was talking underwater. Humans are too violent, she said. They solve problems with war instead of talk. They build weapons instead of art. They take resources from planets instead of asking permission. 12 systems is more than enough for such a young and dangerous species. Around the hall, other aliens nodded or made sounds of agreement. The bird-like avians clicked their metal beaks. The plant-like Verdani rustled their leaves. Even the Curvans, who had been friendly to humans, stayed quiet. Jake looked up at the observation deck where Captain Lisa Hayes stood with other human officers. Lisa was the commander of the UES Defiant, one of Earth's newest and most powerful ships. She had short brown hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Right now, those eyes were filled with anger. Jake had known Lisa for 10 years. They had served together during the first contact with the Zephyrians. They had worked together to stop a war between the Neptari and the Avians. They had saved countless lives and helped build peace between species that had been enemies for centuries. None of that seemed to matter now. The Zephyrian representative was still talking. Humans will also be required to share all their military technology with the Council. Their ships are too advanced for such a primitive species. We must make sure they cannot use these weapons against peaceful civilizations. That was the final straw. Jake felt something break inside his chest. These aliens wanted to cage humanity like dangerous animals. They wanted to take away everything humans had built, everything they had earned through hard work and sacrifice. They wanted to make humans into slaves. Jake stood up straighter. His voice was calm, but everyone in the hall could hear the iron in it. I have listened to your words, he said. I have heard your fears and your demands. I have watched you vote to chain my people like criminals. You call us violent, but we have kept peace in this galaxy for 3 years. You call us primitive, but our technology protects your worlds. You call us dangerous, but we have saved your lives more times than you can count. The hall grew quiet. Even the floating lights seemed to dim. The United Earth Federation has made its decision, Jake continued. We formally withdraw from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. We will no longer be bound by your restrictions, your fears, or your prejudices. We came here in friendship, but you have shown us that friendship is not what you want. The silence that followed was complete. Jake could hear his own heartbeat. He could hear the soft humming of the alien technology that kept the station running. He could hear the shocked breathing of the aliens around him. The Zephyrian representative made a sound like breaking glass. "You cannot simply leave. The Council has authority over all civilized species in this galaxy." Jake smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. "The Council has authority over species that choose to be part of it. We choose to leave. Good luck governing a galaxy that we helped you build." He turned and walked toward the exit. His boots made sharp sounds on the glowing floor. Behind him, the aliens started talking all at once. Their voices mixed together in a chaos of clicks, gurgles, chimes, and rustling sounds. Lisa Hayes was waiting for him at the exit. She fell into step beside him as they walked through the station's corridors. Other human officers and diplomats joined them. Word was already spreading through the human sections of the station. People were packing their belongings, shutting down their offices, and preparing to leave. "How long do we have?" Lisa asked. "I'm giving them 6 hours to clear all humans from Council space," Jake replied. "After that, anyone who wants to stay is on their own." Lisa nodded. "The fleet is already moving. We'll be ready." As they walked, Jake thought about everything humans had given to the galaxy: the shield generators that protected alien cities, the medical knowledge that had saved millions of lives, the communication networks that let different species talk to each other across vast distances, the trade routes that brought prosperity to dozens of worlds. All of that was about to disappear. The aliens thought they could control humanity and keep all the benefits of human knowledge and skill. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 6 hours later, the last human ship left Council space. Behind them, the galaxy's greatest civilization began its long fall into chaos. 3 months had passed since the humans left Council space. Admiral Greg Patterson stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching the stars through the wide windows. The Liberty was humanity's new flagship, bigger and more powerful than any ship they had built before. It floated in empty space, far from the Galactic Council's territory. Greg was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been fighting wars for 30 years, but he had never seen anything like what was happening now. The reports coming from Council space were almost too strange to believe. "Sir, we're getting another message from our spies," said Lieutenant Danny Cooper. He was young, maybe 25, with bright red hair and freckles. He looked nervous as he handed Greg the datapad. Greg read the report and shook his head. "The Zephyrians are offering 1,000,000 credits for any human engineer willing to come back and fix their power grids." 1,000,000 credits? Danny's eyes went wide. "That's enough to buy a small planet." "It's also desperate," Greg said. 3 months ago they were calling us primitive barbarians. Now they're begging for our help." Down in the ship's science lab, Dr. Amy Rodriguez was reading her own reports. Amy was a small woman with dark hair and bright brown eyes. She had worked with alien technology for 5 years, helping to build the partnerships that the Council had just thrown away. The lab was full of screens showing data from across the galaxy. Most of it came from human spy networks that the Council didn't know existed. The information painted a picture that made Amy both sad and angry. "Computer, show me the Zephyrian power grid status," she said. The screen filled with a map of Zephyrian space. Red dots marked power failures across their territory. Yellow dots showed systems running at less than half power. There were very few green dots left. 60% of their infrastructure is failing, Amy said to herself. They built everything using human designs, but they never learned how to maintain it. The truth was simple but devastating. For 3 years, humans had been upgrading and maintaining technology across Council space. They had done it quietly without asking for credit or recognition. The aliens had gotten used to their systems just working, never thinking about who kept them running. Now the systems were breaking down. The Zephyrians had tried to fix them, but their crystal-based technology was completely different from human engineering. It was like trying to repair a car engine with flower petals. On the other side of the galaxy, the Neptari were facing even worse problems. Their underwater cities had been protected by human-designed pressure systems and defense networks. Without regular maintenance, These systems were failing catastrophic ally. Captain Lisa Hayes read the intelligence reports from her quarters aboard the UES Defiant. The Neptari had lost 3 major cities in the past month. Not to enemy attacks, but to simple system failures. Millions of Neptari were fleeing their homes as the protective barriers collapsed. "They're evacuating the capital city," Lisa said to her first officer, Commander Pete Walsh. Pete was a stocky man with a thick black beard and a quick smile. Right now, he wasn't smiling. "How many people?" Pete asked. 50 million, Lisa replied. "They're trying to move 50 million Neptari to temporary shelters on land. Most of them have never breathed air before." Pete whistled low. "That's a disaster." "It's what they wanted," Lisa said coldly. "They voted to restrict us." They called. It was dangerous. Now they're learning what dangerous really looks like. The worst situation was in Corvan space. The Corvans had been humanity's closest allies in the Council. They looked somewhat like humans, but taller and thinner, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. They had always been peaceful, preferring to trade rather than fight. General Henry Clark had been working with the Corvan military for 2 years. He had helped them build their defenses and train their soldiers. He had become friends with many Corvan officers. When the humans left, Henry had wanted to stay and help them. Admiral Patterson had ordered him to leave with the rest of the fleet. Now, Henry stood in the war room of the human colony ship New Frontier, watching the Corvan Empire die. The Vex Confederation had been attacking Corvan border worlds for weeks. The Vex were lizard-like aliens with sharp claws and sharper teeth. They lived for war and conquest. "The Corvans are losing badly," Henry told the other officers. "Without our tactical support, they can't coordinate their defenses. The Vex are cutting through their lines like paper." Colonel Sarah Martinez looked at the battle reports with disgust. Sarah was a combat veteran with scars on her hands and fire in her eyes. She had trained Corvan soldiers and grown to respect them. "The Corvans are good people," she said. "They don't deserve this." "No, they don't," Henry agreed. "But they stood by and let the Council restrict us. They chose politics over friendship." Back on the human colony of New Terra, President Susan Miller was dealing with a flood of refugees. Not human refugees, but aliens who had abandoned Council space to join the human colonies. These were mostly individual scientists, traders, and engineers who had worked closely with humans. Susan was a former diplomat with silver hair and a sharp mind. She had helped negotiate humanity's first contact with dozens of alien species. Now she was watching those same species tear each other apart. "How many refugee ships this week?" she asked her aide, Lieutenant Tom Bradley. 17, Tom replied. "Mostly Corvan families fleeing the war. But we also have Zephyrian scientists and Neptari engineers." "They're all asking for asylum," Susan nodded. "Granted, we won't turn away people who need help." The refugee aliens brought stories of chaos and collapse. The galactic economy was crashing as trade routes shut down. Without human traders to carry goods between hostile species, old prejudices were surfacing. The avians refused to trade with the Verdani. The Christek wouldn't deal with the Neptari. Species that had been peaceful neighbors for decades were now threatening each other over minor disputes. The communication networks that humans had built were failing too. Different species couldn't talk to each other without human translation. Protocols, diplomatic messages were being misunderstood. Trade agreements were falling apart over simple communication errors. Dr. Kevin Thompson, the former head of Human Galactic Communications, watched the breakdown from his new lab on the colony ship Endeavour. Kevin was a quiet man who preferred computers to people, but even he was shocked by how quickly everything was falling apart. "They're trying to rebuild the communication network," he told his assistant, Dr. Nancy Williams. "But they're using 17 different protocols that don't work together?" Nancy shook her head. "It's like trying to build a house with 17 different blueprints." The worst part was that the council members were starting to blame each other for the crisis. The Zephyrians blamed the Neptari for pushing too hard to restrict humanity. The Neptari blamed the avians for not supporting human integration. The Avians blamed everyone else for being too trusting of the dangerous humans. Admiral Patterson received daily reports of the chaos. Each one was worse than the last. The galaxy that had been peaceful and prosperous just 3 months ago was now descending into war, economic collapse, and social breakdown. "Sir," Lieutenant Cooper said, "we're getting another message from the Council. They want to open negotiations." Greg looked at the message and deleted it without reading it. "Tell them we're not interested." "Should I send a formal reply?" "No," Greg said. "Let them figure it out themselves. They wanted us gone. Now they have what they wanted." Outside the ship's windows, the stars looked the same as always. But Greg knew that behind those distant lights, entire civilizations were crumbling. The aliens had been so afraid of human aggression that they had driven away the very people who had been keeping their galaxy peaceful. They had gotten exactly what they deserved. 6 months had passed since the humans walked away from the Galactic Council. Commander Tony Baker piloted his stealth ship through the outer edges of what used to be Council space. The UES shadow was invisible to most sensors, allowing Tony to watch the chaos without being detected. Tony was a quiet man with sharp eyes and steady hands. He had been a spy for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like what was happening now. 3 separate wars had broken out between former council members. The galaxy was tearing itself apart. "Captain, I'm picking up another battle," said Sergeant Kelly Adams from the sensor station. Kelly was young but skilled, with blonde hair tied back in a tight bun. She had been watching the destruction for weeks, and it was starting to affect her. "Where now?" Tony asked. "Sector 7. The Avians and Verdani are fighting over a trade station that humans used to manage." Tony shook his head. The trade station had been neutral territory when humans ran it. Now the bird-like Avians and plant-like Verdani were destroying it rather than let the other side control it. Neither species remembered how to manage interstellar commerce without human help. Back in human space, engineer Rachel Stone was monitoring communications from her lab on the research station Galileo. Rachel was a brilliant woman in her 30s, with curly red hair and oil-stained fingers. She had helped design many of the systems that were now failing across the galaxy. "The Zephyrians are getting desperate," she told her assistant, Dr. Mark Johnson. Mark was a tall man with brown hair and kind eyes. He had worked with Zephyrian scientists for years and still felt sad about what had happened to them. "How desperate?" Mark asked. "They're offering 10 million credits and a full pardon to any human who will come back and help them," Rachel said. "They're also promising to give humans full citizenship and voting rights in their government," Mark whistled. "That's a complete reversal from 6 months ago." "It's too late," Rachel said coldly. "They had their chance to treat us as equals. They chose to treat us as servants instead. The Zephyrian cities were dying. Their crystal structures needed constant energy to maintain their shape and strength. The human-designed power distribution systems were failing one by one. Without these systems, the beautiful crystal cities were cracking and crumbling. Entire districts had been evacuated as buildings collapsed. The Zephyrians were trying to move their people to safer areas, but even those places were failing. Their technology was advanced in many ways, but it was completely different from human engineering. They couldn't fix what they didn't understand. The Neptari were facing an even worse crisis. Dr. Kevin Thompson watched their emergency broadcasts from his communications center on the colony ship Endeavour. Kevin was a quiet man who preferred working with machines to dealing with people, but even he felt sorry for the Neptari. "They've lost 12 major cities in the past month," he told his partner, Dr. Nancy Williams. Nancy was a small woman with dark hair and bright eyes. She had been translating the Neptari emergency calls, and many of them were heartbreaking. "How many people?" Nancy asked. "Nearly 100 million are homeless," Kevin replied. "The underwater cities are collapsing faster than they can evacuate them. The pressure systems that humans designed are failing, and the Neptari don't know how to fix them." The Neptari had always lived underwater. Their bodies were designed for the deep ocean, not for life on land. Now millions of them were crowded into temporary shelters on dry land, struggling to breathe air instead of water. Many were getting sick and dying. The worst part was that the Neptari were too proud to ask for help. They had been some of the loudest voices calling for human restrictions. Now they were suffering the consequences of their arrogance, but they still refused to admit they had been wrong. Meanwhile, the Corvan Empire was fighting for its very survival. General Henry Clark watched the war from his command center on the human military base at Alpha Station. Henry was a career soldier with gray hair and tired eyes. He had trained Corvan officers and considered many of them friends. "The Vex have taken another system," reported Colonel Sarah Martinez. Sarah was a tough woman with scars on her hands and fire in her eyes. She had fought alongside Corvan soldiers and respected their courage. "Which one?" Henry asked. "Corvan Prime's outer colonies," Sarah replied. "The Vex are moving toward the capital system. At this rate, they'll reach it within a month." Henry felt sick. Corvan Prime was home to 10 billion people. If the Vex conquered it, they would enslave or kill every Corvan they found. The Vex were brutal conquerors who showed no mercy to their enemies. The Corvans were brave fighters, but they had always been peaceful people. They preferred trade to war, diplomacy to violence. Human military advisors had helped them build a defense force that could protect their territory. Without that help, they were helpless against the aggressive Vex. "The Corvan military is asking for our help again," Sarah said. "They're offering to make humans full partners in their government if we'll send troops." Henry wanted to help them. The Corvans had been humanity's closest allies in the Council, but Admiral Patterson had been clear: no military intervention in Council space. The aliens had made their choice, and they would have to live with the consequences. Captain Lisa Hayes received similar reports from her ship, the UES Defiant. Lisa was patrolling the border between human space and the chaos of the former Council territory. Her ship was fast and powerful, but she could only watch as the galaxy burned. "Captain, we're getting distress calls from 17 different systems," said her first officer, Commander Pete Walsh. Pete was a stocky man with a thick black beard who usually had a quick smile. These days he rarely smiled. "What kind of distress calls?" Lisa asked. "Everything. Refugee ships asking for asylum. Planets begging for food and medical supplies. Military forces asking for tactical support. Even some calls asking us to take over their governments." Lisa shook her head. "We're not the galaxy's police force. We tried to help them build a better future and they threw us out. Now they want us to save them from their own mistakes." The truth was that the Galactic Council had been held together by human influence more than anyone realized. Humans had been the neutral party that different species could trust. They had been the mediators who solved disputes before they became wars. They had been the innovators who created the technology that made galactic civilization possible. Without humans, the old hatreds and prejudices were coming back. The avians remembered ancient wars with the Verdani. The Zephyrians looked down on the primitive Neptari. The aquatic species refused to deal with the crystal-based ones. Everyone suspected everyone else of cheating in trade deals. President Susan Miller watched the reports from her office on New Terra. Susan was a former diplomat with silver hair and a sharp mind. She had helped build the relationships that were now crumbling. "The galactic economy has collapsed by 60%, she told her aide, Lieutenant Tom Bradley. Tom was a young man with bright eyes who had believed in the dream of galactic cooperation. 60%? Tom looked shocked. How is that possible? Humans were the glue that held it together, Susan explained. We carried goods between species that wouldn't trade with each other. We provided neutral ground for negotiations. We built the communication networks that let everyone talk to each other. Without us, they're back to being isolated and suspicious. The communication breakdown was perhaps the worst problem. Different species used different languages, different protocols, different ways of thinking. Humans had spent years learning how to translate not just words, but concepts and emotions between species. They had built networks that could carry messages across the galaxy instantly. Now those networks were failing. Species couldn't talk to each other without human translation. Simple misunderstandings were becoming major incidents. Trade agreements were being broken over communication errors. Diplomatic messages were being misinterpreted as threats. Dr. Amy Rodriguez studied the breakdown from her lab on the UES. Liberty. Amy was a small woman with dark hair and bright brown eyes who had worked with alien technology for years. She understood better than most how complicated galactic civilization really was. "They're trying to rebuild the communication network," she told Admiral Patterson. "But each species is using their own protocols. The Zephyrians are using crystal resonance. The Neptari are using sonic waves. The Avians are using electromagnetic pulses. None of them work together," Patterson nodded grimly. "It's like trying to build a house where every room uses different building materials." "Worse," Amy said. "It's like trying to build a house where every room exists in a different dimension." The refugee ships kept coming. Every day, more aliens arrived at human colonies, begging for protection and help. Most were individuals who had worked with humans and understood what was happening. Some were entire families fleeing the wars and chaos. The humans accepted them all. It was the right thing to do, and it also proved a point. The aliens who had called humans dangerous and violent were now running to human space for safety. The species that had wanted to restrict human expansion were now begging to live in human territory. Commander Tony Baker finished his patrol and headed back to human space. Behind him, the galaxy that had once been peaceful and prosperous was burning. The aliens had been so afraid of who. 1 year had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council. The galaxy was no longer the same place. Ambassador Frank Davis sat in his office on the human colony ship New Horizon, reading the latest reports from Council space. Frank was a tall man with kind eyes and gray hair, who had served as humanity's second-in-command during the Council years. His desk was covered with messages from former Council members. Each one was more desperate than the last. The proud aliens who had once called humans dangerous were now begging for help like lost children. "Sir, we have another formal apology from the Zephyrians," said his assistant, Lieutenant Carol Peterson. Carol was a young woman with short brown hair and sharp intelligence. She had been tracking the collapse of Council space for months. "What are they offering this time?" Frank asked. "Complete control of their energy grid, full voting rights in their government, and 50 billion credits," Carol replied. "They're also offering to make humans the official protectors of Zephyrian space." Frank almost laughed. A year ago, the Zephyrians had called humans primitive barbarians. Now they were offering to make humans their rulers. It was too little, too late. The Zephyrian civilization was dying. Their beautiful crystal cities were cracking and falling apart. The energy systems that humans had designed were failing one by one. Without power, the crystal structures couldn't maintain their shape. Entire cities were collapsing into glittering rubble. Millions of Zephyrians were living in temporary shelters made of metal and plastic. These ugly buildings were nothing like their graceful crystal homes, but they were the only structures that could stand without the failing energy grid. The proudest species in the galaxy had been reduced to living in refugee camps. Captain Diana Foster watched the destruction from her ship, the UES Sovereign. Diana was an experienced officer with steady hands and sharp eyes. She had been patrolling the border between human space and the chaos of former Council territory. "The Zephyrians are evacuating their capital city," she told her crew. 20 million people are leaving their homes. Her communications officer, Lieutenant Ben Rodriguez, shook his head. "Where will they go? Half their planets are uninhabitable now." "That's their problem," Diana said coldly. "They made their choice when they voted to restrict us." The Zephyrians weren't the only ones suffering. The Neptari had lost most of their underwater cities. Their people were crowded into land-based shelters, struggling to breathe air instead of water. Many were getting sick and dying. The ocean-dwelling species was facing extinction. The Avians and Verdani were fighting a brutal war over territory and resources. The bird-like Avians were trying to claim the garden worlds that the plant-like Verdani needed to survive. Neither species remembered how to negotiate without human mediators, but the worst situation was in Corvan space. The Vex Confederation had conquered half the Corvan Empire. The lizard-like Vex were known for their cruelty. They enslaved conquered populations and destroyed everything they couldn't use. General Henry Clark watched the war from his command center on Alpha Station. Henry was a career soldier who had trained Corvan officers and considered many of them friends. Now he could only watch as their civilization was destroyed. "The Vex have reached the outer defenses of Corvan Prime," reported Colonel Sarah Martinez. Sarah was a tough woman who had fought alongside Corvan soldiers. Her voice was tight with anger and frustration. "How long can the capital hold?" Henry asked. "Maybe 2 weeks," Sarah replied. "The Corvans are brave, but they're not warriors. They don't know how to fight a war without our help." Henry felt sick. Corvan Prime was home to 10 billion people. If the Vex conquered it, they would enslave or kill every Corvan they found. It would be the end of one of the galaxy's most peaceful civilizations. The Corvans had been humanity's closest allies in the Council. They had always treated humans with respect and kindness. But when the vote came to restrict humanity, they had remained silent. They had chosen political safety over friendship. Now they were paying the price for their cowardice. Secretary of Defense Robert Chun reviewed the intelligence reports from his office on New Terra. Robert was a smart man with dark hair and serious eyes. He had been watching the collapse of Council space with growing concern. "The Vex are getting stronger," he told President Susan Miller. "Every world they conquer gives them more resources and more soldiers. They're becoming a real threat." Susan nodded grimly. "How long before they reach human space?" "At their current rate of expansion, maybe 5 years," Robert replied. "But they're moving faster as they get stronger." "It could be sooner." The truth was that the Galactic Council had been more than just a political organization. It had been a military alliance that kept aggressive species like the Vex in check. Without the Council's united front, the Vex were free to expand as much as they wanted. The humans had been the backbone of the Council's military power. Their ships were faster and more advanced than anything the aliens had built. Their tactics were more flexible and creative. Their soldiers were better trained and more experienced. Without human protection, the peaceful species of the galaxy were helpless against the aggressive ones. President Susan Miller called an emergency meeting of the Human Colonial Alliance. The alliance was humanity's new government formed after leaving the Council. It included not just human colonies, but also the alien refugees who had fled to human space. "We need to make a decision," Susan told the assembled leaders. "Do we help the Council, or do we let the galaxy burn?" Admiral Greg Patterson spoke first. "They made their choice when they voted to restrict us. We owe them nothing." "But what about the innocent people?" asked Dr. Amy Rodriguez. "Billions of civilians are dying because of their leaders' mistakes." "That's war," said General Henry Clark. "In war, innocent people always suffer." The aliens started this conflict when they chose fear over friendship. The debate went on for hours. Some leaders wanted to help the struggling alien civilizations. Others wanted to let them face the consequences of their actions. A few wanted to use the crisis to expand human territory. In the end, they voted to maintain their current policy. No military intervention in Council space. No aid to former Council members. No involvement in the wars and chaos that the aliens had brought upon themselves, but they would continue to accept refugees and protect human space from any threats. The decision was announced throughout human space. Many people agreed with it. The aliens had treated humanity badly, and now they were facing the results of their prejudice and fear, but some humans felt guilty about abandoning their former allies. They remembered the good times, the joint projects, the friendships they had built with individual aliens. They wondered if humanity was becoming as cold and heartless as the aliens had claimed. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council held an emergency session. Only 32 of the original 47 members attended. The rest were too busy fighting wars or dealing with internal collapse to participate. The session was broadcast across the galaxy. For the first time in Council history, the assembled aliens formally apologized to humanity. They admitted that their fear and prejudice had been wrong. They begged for forgiveness and help. The Zephyrian representative, his crystal body dim and cracked, spoke with a voice full of despair. We were wrong about humans. We let our fear blind us to their value. We destroyed the greatest alliance in galactic history because we were too proud to admit that we needed them. The Neptari representative, her blue form flickering with weakness, agreed. Humans were not our enemies. They were our saviors. They kept peace between species that had been at war for centuries. They built the technology that made our civilization possible. We threw away paradise because we were afraid of their strength. Even the Avians, who were fighting a desperate war with the Verdani, sent a message of apology. We call upon humanity to return to the galaxy. We offer full partnership, equal voting rights, and unlimited expansion. We will give humans anything they want if they will only save us from ourselves. The broadcast reached human space within hours. Jake Morrison, now serving as humanity's president, watched it from his office on New Terra. Jake was the same man who had announced humanity's withdrawal from the council a year ago. He looked older now, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes. They're finally admitting the truth, he told his advisors. Too bad it's too late. Should we respond? Asked Frank Davis. Jake shook his head. We already gave them our answer when we left. Actions have consequences. They chose to treat us as enemies, and now they're facing the results of that choice. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson about the cost of prejudice and fear. The aliens had been so afraid of human aggression that they had driven away the very people who had been keeping their civilization peaceful and prosperous. Now they were reaping what they had sown, and it was far worse than anything humans could have done to them. 2 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council. President Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of New Terra's Capitol building, looking out at the bustling city below. The human colony had grown beyond all expectations. Tall buildings stretched toward the sky, and flying cars moved between them in orderly patterns. Jake was older now, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes. But he looked satisfied as he watched the prosperity of human space. The decision to leave the council had been the right one, even if it had been painful at the time. Mr. President, the Alliance Assembly is ready for your speech, said his aide, Lieutenant Carol Peterson. Carol had grown into her role as one of Jake's most trusted advisors. She was smart, efficient, and completely loyal to the human cause. Jake nodded and walked toward the assembly hall. The Human Colonial Alliance had become something amazing in just 2 years. It wasn't just humans anymore. Dozens of alien species had joined them, refugees from the chaos of council space who had seen the truth about human leadership. The assembly hall was huge, filled with representatives from 43 different worlds. Humans sat next to Corvin. Refugees, Zephyrian scientists, and Neptari engineers. These aliens had abandoned their dying civilizations to join humanity's growing alliance. Dr. Amanda Wright sat in the front row, wearing the blue uniform of the Alliance Science Council. Amanda was a brilliant woman in her 40s with short blonde hair and bright green eyes. She had led the development of new technologies that made the old council's science look primitive. Fellow citizens of the Alliance, Jake began his speech. 2 years ago, we were told that humans were too dangerous for the galaxy. We were restricted, limited, and treated like children. Today, I want to show you what humans can really do when we are free. The screens around the hall lit up with images of human achievements. New worlds had been terraformed and turned into gardens. Advanced ships explored distant galaxies. Medical centers saved lives using technology that the old council had never dreamed of. We have faster-than-light communication that reaches across the entire galaxy in seconds, Jake continued. We have shield technology that can protect entire star systems. We have terraforming equipment that can turn dead rocks into living worlds. In just months. In the audience, Captain Lisa Hayes smiled with pride. Lisa had been promoted to admiral and now commanded the Alliance's most advanced fleet. Her ships were faster, stronger, and more advanced than anything the old council had possessed. The truth was that freedom had unleashed human creativity in ways that surprised even the humans themselves. without the Council's restrictive regulations and fearful oversight. Human scientists and engineers had made breakthrough after breakthrough. Dr. Kevin Thompson had developed communication systems that could translate any language instantly. Dr. Nancy Williams had created medical technology that could heal injuries in minutes. Engineer Rachel Stone had built energy systems that were completely clean and endlessly renewable. The Alliance was everything the Galactic Council should have been. It was a true partnership between species, based on mutual respect and shared goals. Humans led the Alliance, but they listened to their alien partners and valued their contributions. Meanwhile, the former Galactic Council was dying a slow death. Captain Stephen Martinez patrolled the border between Alliance space and what remained of Council territory. Stephen was an experienced officer who had watched their collapse with growing sadness. "Sir, we're detecting another refugee convoy," reported his communications officer. "Lieutenant Julie Adams." Julie was a young woman with bright eyes who had joined the Alliance fleet straight from the Academy. "How many ships?" Stephen asked. 23 vessels, mostly Corvan families," Julie replied. "They're requesting permission to enter Alliance space." Stephen sighed. The refugee convoys came every day now. Entire populations were fleeing the chaos of their former homes to seek safety in human space. The Alliance accepted them all, but it was heartbreaking to see so many people displaced by their leaders' mistakes. The Corvan Empire had finally fallen. The Vex Confederation had conquered their capital world just 3 months ago. 10 billion Corvans had been enslaved or killed. The survivors were scattered across the galaxy, homeless and desperate. The Zephyrians were facing extinction. Their crystal cities had all collapsed, and their people were dying in refugee camps. The energy systems they needed to survive were too complex for them to maintain without human help. The Neptari had lost their underwater civilization completely. Millions had died trying to adapt to life on land. The rest were begging other species for help. But no one had the technology to rebuild their ocean cities. The Avians and Verdani were still fighting their pointless war. Both species were exhausted and running out of resources, but they were too proud to admit defeat. Their beautiful worlds were being turned into wastelands by the conflict. Only the Vex Confederation was growing stronger. The lizard-like warriors had conquered half the galaxy and showed no signs of stopping. They were the real winners of the Council's collapse, feeding on the chaos like vultures. President Susan Miller reviewed the latest intelligence reports from her office on the research station Galileo. Susan had become the Alliance's head of foreign affairs, managing relationships with the remaining alien governments. "The Vex are expanding toward the old Council core worlds," she told Secretary of Defense Robert Chun. Robert looked tired but determined as he studied the military projections. "How long before they reach Alliance space?" Robert asked. "At their current rate, maybe 3 years," Susan replied. "But they're getting stronger with every conquest. Each world they take gives." "The more ships and soldiers," Robert nodded grimly. "We need to be ready. The Vex won't stop until they control the entire galaxy." The Alliance was already preparing for that possibility. Human military technology had advanced dramatically in the past 2 years. The new Alliance fleet was more powerful than anything the old Council had ever fielded. Admiral Greg Patterson commanded the fleet from his flagship, the UES Liberator. Greg was a veteran officer who had seen the rise and fall of the Galactic Council. He was determined not to let the Alliance make the same mistakes. "The new ships are ready for testing," he told his officers. "We have weapons that can destroy entire fleets, shields that can protect whole star systems, and engines that can cross the galaxy in days." The technology was impressive, but Greg knew that the Alliance's real strength was its unity. Humans and aliens worked together as equals, sharing knowledge and resources freely. The old Council had been held back by fear and prejudice. The Alliance was powered by cooperation and trust. Back on New Terra, Jake Morrison finished his speech to thunderous applause. The Alliance citizens were proud of what they had built together. They had created a civilization that was everything the Galactic Council had promised to be but never achieved. The galaxy tried to cage humanity, Jake said in closing. They feared our strength and our ambition. They thought they could control us and use us for their own purposes. Instead, they taught us that we didn't need them at all. The audience cheered as Jake left the stage. Outside, the city of New Terra sparkled in the sunlight. Ships came and went from the spaceport, carrying goods and people between dozens of Alliance worlds. The economy was booming, science was advancing, and art and culture were flourishing. It was everything the Galactic Council could have been if they had chosen partnership over control. In the ruins of the old council space, the remaining aliens struggled to survive in the chaos they had created. Some still sent desperate messages to the Alliance, begging for help and offering everything they had left. The Alliance ignored them all. Some people called this cruel, but Jake knew it was necessary. The galaxy had to learn that actions had consequences. Fear and prejudice came with a price, and that price was the destruction of everything the fearful had tried to protect. The aliens had been given a choice between cooperation and conflict. They had chosen conflict, and now they were living with the results. Meanwhile, humanity had moved on to build something better with the aliens who had been wise enough to choose cooperation instead. The galaxy had learned a harsh, but important lesson. Sometimes the most powerful response to hatred was not anger or revenge, but simple indifference. The humans had taken their talents, their dreams, and their future with them when they left. What remained behind was a warning to anyone who would try to cage the human spirit. In the end, the Galactic Council's greatest fear had been realized, but not in the way they had imagined. They had worried about human aggression destroying their civilization. Instead, it was human absence that had brought about their downfall. They had lost everything they valued by driving away the very people who could have helped them keep it. The new galaxy was a better place, but only for those wise enough to embrace the future instead of fearing it.